Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Hello. I
You
see.
can
Okay. Talking across time and space.
across time and space. I am in Across still. You are in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are here talking about the upcoming Atlanta Art Week, which will take place from October 3rd to 5th. Um, I'm so excited to talk to you about your exhibition that we've been working on, Persistent Color.
Okay.
Um, this is your first solo exhibition in Atlanta, not so?
It is. It is. I've never been to Atlanta. And
So excited to have you.
pardon?
Said we're so excited to have you.
Okay. I am also very excited to show in Atlanta. Long, long years ago, Atlanta, as a big southern city, was a big part of Trinidad experience. You remember it was twinned with Port of Spain. And we had
Was it?
visits. Yes, it is twinned. And we had visits from the then first Black mayor to Trinidad, Andrew Young, came to
Oh,
Trinidad
wow.
so many years ago as part of the twinning celebration. And, there was all this talk about the new South and the new perspectives of what I would like to call plantation America, because we were at the southern end of a plantation that extended all the way up north. Anyway, so that is just a little bit of my contextual history, if you want to call it like that. So it's very,
Well,
I'm pleased to show everywhere, but Atlanta holds another significance.
of
So,
course.
the opportunity to show is great. Wonderful.
Yes. So I wanted to first start with a little bit of your background and I guess, growing up in Trinidad, what led you towards this practice? What type of schooling led you towards this abstract practice that you've developed over so many years? I know you schooled in London for some time as well as at the UWI. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, the secondary school experience grew out of my own home background, and my school background pushed me into the art society in San Fernando. Now, at that time, we all thought about art as a nice hobby. I had a
Hmm.
particular skill that I could render things, and so people thought that, oh, you have talent, as the case goes. But that was if you want to call it, a limitation of the way in which I saw um, my own abilities until I
Hmm.
went to teachers college. And my perspectives broadened because I began to understand the ways in which an art practice builds upon an intellectual tradition, and an intellectual tradition in Trinidad that was moving towards the decolonization of, uh, of, of, of the society and all of its various practices. And that really is the turning point, or a major turning point in my own background and evolution. That movement from it being a hobby and
Hmm.
it's a delightful skill that could amuse people into something that is now more, if you want to call it, political, that deals with the issue of culture and the way in which we understand our position within a cultural sphere. Um, After that, of course,
So yeah, let's continue. You were talking about that kind of post-colonial moment, which would have been in the 60s and 70s when you were taking your art practice from a hobby and really viewing it through a political lens and as a contribution to like a more of a political and intellectual statement, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And the opportunity to intensify that understanding that way of going forward. So I traveled to London. I went to London. In those days, there were no art schools in the Caribbean. So I went to London and stayed 4 years there. Now that was a defining moment because I went into the heart of so much of the things that I was learning about. You learned so much British history. We learned so much. I knew more British history than even my fellow students.
I'm sure.
You know, because I've always been very interested and intrigued by history. And I knew, well, you know, they had a very classical approach to history. It had to do with the great people. And that made me understand that I knew something. I didn't know as much about my own self. So then began my own reconstruction of my own reality. Reconstructing it from afar gives you a perspective that is very strategic because you see the whole and you see where you are in the cosmos, if you like. And that reconstruction was important so that at the end of my study, I came back home to really now understand how my work could flourish or how it could engage the circumstances of our situation. Now, our situation was dire. There have been people, and it continues into the moment. There were people who were really working before me, who were working to reconstruct the way in which we were identified. That we were not, because the perception of many people, even when I went to London, is that you were stereotypes. You know, we were all beach bums or idle or muscle rather than mental people. You know, those stereotypes.
Stereotypes of Caribbean people, right?
You know, so it was important to diminish this and to build upon the work that artists, writers had been doing before I was born. So that became part of my own concern. How do I contribute? How do I make it happen?
On that note, I want to ask you a question because you mentioned, you know, your work being a contribution to changing people's ideas and not changing necessarily, but you rewriting ideas about Caribbean people, even though your work has mostly been abstract.
Okay.
How do you think that this kind of abstract practice contributes to changing of identities, even though there's no like explicit identity in the work? Or has your work changed from having more individual identities and being more figurative? Have there been transitions like that over your practice?
Yeah, well, like most people, I started in a figurative explorations, but I began to move away from it because I wanted to go back to the absolute beginning of an art practice, which is really about making a mark and spreading out color. Color has an important part to play because for me, once you use color to match an emotion, you begin to engage a viewer. And as the color begins to resonate, you know, it begins to tell its own story. And I wanted the color to do that in the same way as musicians, or particularly jazz musicians, improvise and make a sound into a feeling. And thus an expression. So that the color, and I applaud the choice of persistent color, because it's persisting in not only in terms of its presentation on a surface, but how it persists through space and time. You know, one of the things as well, just to go back to my own experience in London, for example, I went to London in September the first time, and although I knew about winter and whatnot, and people reading poems that tell you about the grey London and whatnot, but the physical experience of it is one, and then the way in which darkness arrived very quickly, and it was always, what people like to refer to as muggy, and you begin to understand that the environment that I grew up in had so much color, vitality in it. So that on my first return home, where everybody wants to come back home for Christmas, I came back home for Christmas and I was not appalled, I was overwhelmed that I grew up in a house where part of the walls were painted in orange, and, the whole color was almost like an assault on my eyes. So, you get up and you're looking at it and say, my goodness, I grew up in this.
And that's something that I think is so recognizable in your works, is that Caribbean approach to color, which people might think, oh, they're just colorful, but I think that there is a way of combining color and there is a way of using color that is very native to the Caribbean. When we recently took your works to Johannesburg, I think I mentioned to you that a few people instantly recognized that this work was not from South Africa. This work was not of the continent, and then asked me, where is this work from? And some even identified without me saying that it was from the Caribbean. You know what I mean? Why do you think it is? What are some of the influences in the Caribbean that you think lend to that sort of like specific color theory that is in your works?
You see, one of the things that happens for us, for me in Trinidad, we are just above the equator. So the sun arrives very quickly on mornings. And, so that we move from dark to light very quickly. And that first light is always so awesome. And then by the time it gets overhead, sometimes the light bleaches out the color, so that it becomes like a glitter. And especially if you're close to the sea, when you see that silver glitter on the water, that it almost drains out all of the color. So then you begin to see the ways in which color moves from a rich intensity down to a glitter, and then it goes back. So there is a spectrum event that reveals the color in a very emotional way. Because there are lots of things you could do with the color. It's fundamentally it's a lot about harmony and contrast. So you could create lovely harmonies that take you in one direction, and then there's contrast that changes up the rhythm and things like that. So there's a language that you can construct out of it, and then of course the textures that you can apply to it, and the handling, and so those became for me the medium, the ways of working, the ways of making an image emerge out of it. And not just a figurative image, an image that inhabits the viewer. And in this way, I'm always very intrigued by musicians. When you play a piece of music and it keeps spinning around in your head, I want that to happen with an experience of color that you see you see it in the back of your eyes all the time. So
That's kind of what I was thinking with the name persistent color, is
absolutely.
the color persists.
Yes.
And I don't, it sounds very simple, but what I mean is that as a viewer looking at these paintings, the painting is going to continue to tell you what it needs to tell you until you accept it as a viewer.
Yeah.
Color is not going to change, the light may change, and so it may look different in the dark from the day, but it's going to persist. And at some point, you as a viewer, you're going to have to accept what you are feeling when you view this painting, right?
Right.
Um,
And your spatial distance is also
you
important. Mhm.
resonate with the name. Um, I want to ask you, in that post-colonial moment, when you were kind of coming into your own practice and figuring out what, Kenwyn Critchlow's painting practice was going to look like, was there that pressure to think figuratively? And what was the attitude towards people that were working in the abstract and artists that were kind of going against that sort of representation in the work?
All right. Well, for me, I understood that abstraction had its foundational roots in the arts of Africa and in the arts of um, um, colonized people, whether they were in Latin America, whether they were in Trinidad or wherever. That the figuration
Mm-hmm.
is in which it evolved in Europe around, had a lot to do with issues of property, issues of uh, dis-
Ownership.
yes, you know that that I could from this sitting in this position, seeing all of that could be mine in that sense.
Everyone will know
And
that because my portrait is sitting at the door or above the door.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, and there was that, and there was also the idea because I came from the Caribbean, my work was supposed to be and I use air quotes primitive to do work that was raw by men. Raw was a way of saying unskilled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh,
Polish.
yes, so that. So there was even a sense that you're stepping out of your domain of
Mm-hmm.
pictorial expression. These were the limits that were applied to you, that it had to be obviously political, it had to be obviously racial, and those kind of concepts. And I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to go down that street because I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that as part of me. You know, so the my concern was really now to get to uh, a use of pictorial language that was purer and in which I am in control of a lot of the um, mechanics of it, so that the uh, the viewer
Mm-hmm.
participate in its meaning. Because um, people like to say, art is about the artist. No, no. Yes, it probably is. But for me, it is about the viewer. We
Mm-hmm.
go, we give time to stand in front of a work to find something about ourselves. If it is that we are looking at a mirror, we look at the mirror to see if everything is all right. We look at a painting to also to recreate your own personal experience or the experiences of your own context. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Post-colonial moment was also critical to returning to Trinidad. All right.
As opposed to staying in the cosmopole of London and
That's right. Where you
seeing
had
that
access.
as a better opportunity than being in Trinidad as a working artist.
That's right. Yes. That was because there were Caribbean artists working in London and so on. But I found in talking to those few that I met, I didn't meet them all. I always got a sense of there being um, a sense of their being feeling that they are in exile.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to feel as if I was in exile. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about the society that I lived in. We were, uh, we talk about ourselves as being a multi-religious society, but I didn't know much about the other religions.
Mm-hmm.
I explored religious art of India, Africa, Europe, and I recognized that there was a, a, a some insights in those pieces that I needed to know of my own society. So I had to come back and rediscover what the spiritual Baptists were really about, what the Hindus in Trinidad were really about, which is different from the Hindu art of India. But
Mm-hmm. They're
um,
almost like a diaspora of India as well, yeah.
that's right, and the traditional African religions. I had never been to a Pali, for example. I had not really looked at or listened um, constructively to the music making that emerged out of uh, uh, traditional African religions and things. So it was for me a journey back to myself to find out what uh, what this place holds and held
Yeah.
for me, things that I had or intuited or things that I picked up without recognizing their significance. Hmm.
And so upon returning to Trinidad, at what point did you then get into administrating and then looking towards like working with institutions? Because I know you were one of the founding faculty members of the visual arts programs at UWI.
Yes.
Um, how was that period of your practice when you were both a practicing artist as well as nurturing like the next generation of Caribbean artists?
Just no. Yes, that's for me. That was for me a very exciting opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
to engage with the formation of a practice at the tertiary level. I had been doing it at secondary level for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was also this push because of the transformations that were going on in the education system to add more depth to the secondary school experience. So it was a good and great opportunity. I am really very fortunate to have had that opportunity to move into the university system and to
Mm-hmm.
begin the process of constructing a curriculum and a space within which ideas could be critiqued and nurtured um, so that we can um, intensify the art practice in, in the Caribbean. It's a way really of talking back to London, talking back to the colonialists who had
Mm-hmm.
expectations of our own practices and to build upon them and to add confidence so that artists could feel empowered to speak, to show things that they are interested in and not demur and figure, well, there must be something a little better than mine. So let me just look at that first and then I will do mine after. No, deal with what is here in front of you. And that's really for me was the opportunity that I had. And was it last week? Um, the center at the university celebrated an anniversary, and I am happy. I left very happy that they had moved on, that the ideas that I brought were now pushed into the background and some new ideas are being brought to the fore. So you got a sense that what I was able to do is not a monolith that has to keep bumping going down the road, but it's something that moves into the rear window and new ideas are being built upon it.
Yeah, it's always a good sign when something can lead to innovation.
That's right.
And lead people to think of new ways and new ways of thinking. Recently, you were awarded the Hummingbird Medal.
Ah, yes, for art, yes.
From Trinidad and Tobago. How did that come about?
That was a
How
bit
did
of
that feel as an artist to be recognized by the state for your
yeah,
contributions?
yeah. It was a quite uplifting moment for me. Because for on many reasons, on many levels. One about the language of my own picture making, which is generally referred to as abstract. That this sense that people have seen through to an essential structure and some meanings that holds the image, holds it together so that an image is created. That was very humbling to acknowledge that as part of my own celebration or acknowledgement of what I did. One of the things that I was what for me was always very important to do was to maintain a practice.
Mm-hmm.
For many of us, when we start off doing art as a hobby, you do it as a part-time thing. You clear the kitchen table and you make a little mess, then you clean up after a little while and you move on. And I always wanted a space. I used to use my bedroom and things like that, but every paint gets on everything. And I always wanted a space. So I came back. My aunt, she's now deceased, offered me the ground floor of her house for me to develop my studio. And I mean, that was such a heartfelt experience because it now meant that I could put up work and leave it up and people could come and visit and so it became a working studio, and that has continued right through to the studio that I work in now.
Yeah. I would like to ask you about that process of making your works because they're so big and so layered.
Right. Yes.
So what is the timeline like? What is the process like? How many times do you visit a painting? Do they often go away for some time before they come back? Do you sit with them? What is that studio process like?
That process is I'm having a persisting, I use the word, conversation with paintings. We begin a conversation, the blank canvas and myself, um, the blank canvas asks that you put something on it because that white screen could be intimidating. And sometimes because you put a lot of them together, you feel that, oh, I shouldn't do anything at all with it. It's so nice and pristine. But um, the business about a studio is that for me, I need to start with chaos.
Okay.
And so I create some chaos and begin a conversation. Simply put, I begin to ask, what it is you're talking, what it is you want to tell me out of this chaos, and I begin to figure out what I may want, how I could participate in a conversation with the piece. So really, what happens very often is that the painting at the end of it is nothing about that I intended, but it's something that we intended.
Mm.
That there is another force that um, uh, emanates, comes out of the canvas, that and we together we sort of reason out this thing. Sometimes the conversations engaging and go on quickly. Sometimes they go on over a period of years. Just last week I was doing a piece of work and I realized that I thought I finished it in 2019, and
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it a couple of days last week, about 2 weeks ago, and I said, "My goodness, how could this painting? There's an unfinished conversation here." So I went back into it and did some more work on it, and well, it's a different thing, but
I've heard a lot of artists refer to their approach, especially painters, to the canvas as a problem. And I don't mean a problem in a negative way, but kind of like a puzzle that needs to be solved, something that needs to be, rearranged until it makes sense.
yes,
Is that the sense that you got when you first start with chaos and then gradually
yes.
break down and gradually dissect the messages and the colors and the feelings that are coming out of the canvas?
That's right, yes. There is a sense of that conversation that goes on that tries to bring some order out of the chaos, that um, sometimes not trying to impose an idea, but trying to allow something to breathe out of the work. In this way, very often it's sometimes very difficult. It's impossible for me to make the same painting twice because each is a separate conversation. So that there is a sense of this conversation going on across time. So there is a layering of ideas and adding on new information and things like that. Right? So,
And as you've gone on your practice, have there been other artists that you think have really moved you in your practice, or other testimonies from other artists that have kind of inspired you or influenced you, do you think? Any that you can like recognize?
well, that's interesting. Early in I try to look at everything that's available in my environment, whether it's online or on YouTube or in the galleries and Portsmouth. I always say there's no bad painting or no. There are things that everybody's trying to do something, and
Mm-hmm.
challenge is to try and see what it is they're trying to do. In that way, it helps me to understand what I am trying to do at the same time. Some, the solutions that they have, that they may have made towards the resolution of a problem on the surface. It gives me an opportunity to think about, oh, I would have done it this way. And that may have been interesting. So, you begin to look at work in this kind of way. So in a sense, if to go back to your question, if I interpret it right, there is no one artist or one art movement that I am particularly influenced by. Earlier in my own scholarship at university level, yes, I was powerfully influenced by, and convicted by the ways in which some artists work. But no one in particular, no. I see opportunities in everything, even that piece of work behind your head that, there are things, the use of the color and the horizontality of the composition that, you file it away, because, this, you could make a composition like that. Look how you use the verticals with the communicating the essential meaning that he or she wants to communicate. It's all using the verticals. So that's a way in which I address the artistry that's around us.
I think recently, in the 80s and 90s, the conversation about African art and art diaspora went through the phase of changing from approaching it as traditional or primitive to recognize it as contemporary art. Do you think that there's another shift happening now with people's approach to Black art and people's approach to art made by Black people around the globe? Have you noticed any shifts?
Yeah, I've noticed that there are far more publications that feature the work of Black artists. There are lots of new exhibitions that feature the diasporic experience as something exclusive and separate from the continental African experience. There are some linkages, but there are also some ways in which the work diverges. And I find that is really very interesting, because it means that we're beginning to look at the art of African descended people, not as a monolith, but as something that holds a lot of sophistication in its diversity. That there is a depth of meaning and skill, and importantly, a forward-looking creativity. That one of the things that is very apparent in the contemporary continental African work. What I find very fascinating in the way in which the African artists have broken away from the potential trap of the traditional or the tribal art, and to be able to not be trapped in it, but to be able to work through it so that it becomes part of the process of growth and so on. Because there's always a sense of looking back at it and romanticizing it and becoming so enwrapped in it that you don't want to go forward into anything else. So
And
yes.
I wanna just pose something that I didn't really think of before, but I'm thinking of now, is that, and I think about this a lot for the developmental trajectories of all displaced people, which Black people around the world are. Something that's very key for an artist is finding that sense of identity. And I do think that it's also a function of time, that Black art and diasporic art needed time, and art of the continent as well, needed time to identify itself and to kind of build and then diversify and diverge into those various identities, right? Which are obviously informed by different experiences. The Caribbean experience being one, with even within the Caribbean having different. Trinidadian experience may be different from the Jamaican experience, but those divergences needed time to become apparent, needed time to develop, right? So do you think it's both a function of artists themselves finding that identity and it becoming more apparent and clear in the work that they're producing, as well as globally people not knowing how to identify or respond to art of Africa and the diaspora?
That's a very interesting and area, a topical area of discussion and um, thinking about, the art practice. I suspect a lot of what you're engaging with is this growing, if you want to call it, self-confidence of artists, that their individual perspectives are as significant as the other. That although they may not be joined together in a what you call it, an organized community, but there is a collective, almost intuitive moving forward, and finding confidence in the practice. And because the nature of work, the nature of work, the nature of the intellectual underpinning of our practice becomes more that you're seeking more insightful understandings, so that
But understanding takes time, right?
takes time.
And so perhaps this is not a conversation that's necessarily linked to external validation of our work, but more an internal conversation about how do we feel that our own work and the work of our peers has developed. And I do think that maybe it's a question of us understanding that the ideas and our sense of self also needed time to develop and needed time to be thought out, you
Yeah.
know? You can't be born onto the earth and understand oneself immediately, especially given the various histories of displaced Africans and many people in the various diaspora. In Trinidad, we also have the Indian diaspora. We have Chinese
Chinese.
who have moved to Trinidad or have been moved.
That's right.
Um,
Then you have
so
the first peoples, they
that first
who
people
who
were
who,
displaced
who
from
were
their homeland.
displaced, internally displaced peoples, you know. And if I could touch on them as well, the October, the month October is their month of memory. And
Mm-hmm.
October the 14th is an important day for the indigenous people of Trinidad, because that's the day that they remember, that the way in which colonialism and enslavement worked to destroy their civilization. So
Yeah.
yeah, but
Ken,
mhm,
are you aware of the exhibition in Paris called Paris Noir? It's at the Centre Pompidou.
that's right. Yes, I am. Yes, his last exhibition of the before they closed the building for repairs.
Yes, I was not aware, but so I visited this exhibition, ironically on my way to the Caribbean,
Okay.
because we talked about Paris being a link
Yes.
between African countries and the Americas, as it was this big cosmopole. And of course, timely exhibition,
Timely.
as we have all these conversations about the various diasporas, because it covered Caribbean artists, mostly from the Francophone
Francophone.
islands, as well as African American artists and continental African artists who would have been converging in Paris. And I can't help but feel that this convergence would have also spread over to London, which you would have been a part of. What were some of the conversations happening at that time? I know we touched on it in the beginning. And who were some of your contemporaries that you guys were all having this kind of experience in the cosmopole after being in the various Commonwealth countries, etc.
Uh, the the conversations that were going on in the 1970s in London.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, um, a lot of the conversation was going on around the um, the Notting Hill Carnival because the carnival is a festival form, and as a festival form, it brings with it the music, the performance styles, the color, the people, all of these um, uh, features of the festival. It brought it and put it in the middle of the society, and a lot of the conversations were going on about ban it, close it down, take it out, too much violence, and this is not British, and so a lot of the arguments are still going on today. But a lot of the conversations in the artwork was about that. There were some West Indian um, emigres from the Caribbean who were exhibiting in London at the time and working as artists. Um, Aubrey Williams was one
Mm-hmm.
that I was fascinated with because at that time he was um, bringing to the British public images that came from the indigenous people of Guyana, the Arawakan people and so on. And there was the other Frank Bowling. Those were the senior artists at the time who were path breaking the opening up the world to let it know that, hey, there are Caribbean artists who are working, who are not only writers or performers, but there was this visual art tradition that was going on. It was also the time in which there was a movement called the Caribbean Artists Movement that came to a lot of resolutions in the 1960s. But by the 1970s, the intensity of what they were doing was being worn down. It was still there, but it was being replaced by the dynamism of the Carnival festival. So that is the context. It is also part of my appreciation of London that made me want to return home to really work because I mean I came from where the carnival was happening, where the carnival had particular different meaning. Even though there were Trinidadians who were involved in setting up a carnival in Notting Hill in London, I knew it from the source. And I think I needed to come back and, appreciate it at another level now, you know.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Carnival was born out of rebellion, right?
Absolutely. Yes, right.
But then again, when it hit its second rebellion, when it moved back to the metropole, it kind of changed in
Yeah.
vibe.
It changed because it had to deal with what its own reality, the own new reality.
Yeah, so it was sort of a different rebellion. You know, the
That's
slaves rebelled against the French, and then we got Carnival, and then now you have members of the Commonwealth going out into the streets to revel
right. Yes.
against the British, but in a
That's
different context and at a different time.
different
So
context,
yeah,
different time. Absolutely. You're dead on the point. Right.
yeah. So it kind of changes things, and the original, so to speak, has a different feel.
Oh, yes.
The
And
not
yes. And even the original is undergoing its own transformation and changes
as we speak, as we
as we
speak.
speak. Mhm.
Okay, Ken. Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. Thank you.
we're so
Mhm.
excited for this show. I'm so
Yeah.
excited for the Atlanta audience to see the work that we've talked about, that we've described, a little bit of your background on. Um, we've had such good response by just like putting out imagery and
Okay.
sending out newsletters. So I'm excited, and I hope that you can make it to the
I am
exhibition.
hoping that I could make it as well. I very, very much would like to visit. Um, you raised the issue about the the exhibition in Paris. I mean, I wish that I could have been around that gallery. I went to the Pompidou, as they call it, center a few months or early in its life. Was
Mhm.
this as they used to call it, this refinery with all of the expos. So I was a student at the time, so it was for me an enriching experience to go and see the art that was being presented and look at the ways in which the building competed with the paintings and sculptures that were in it and things. Well,
Yeah, it's quite an impressive building
it
from
was
what
very impressive. So when you raise the question, I said, I really wanted to go to that one, but was unable to, still unable to. But um, this Atlanta Art Week, more or less, I'm working hard to make sure that I can make it.
okay.
Maybe not. It doesn't seem as if it's going to be the third because there's no response yet from them. And
Okay, well, we have a few days after that.
we have a few
So
days after that, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to do it.
yeah, and with the art week, in bringing your work, we are hoping to contribute to that conversation of the similarities and divergences between different practices across the African diaspora. So
Yes,
bring someone from the Caribbean to what is turning out to be quite a significant southern city and a cosmopole of the South, Atlanta, where we can kind of see that convergence happen, and then also identify the divergence that we might find.
that's it. That's right.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
Thank you. And Kendra,